Hey there. Thanks for tuning into Duck Bricks. I'm Chris, and welcome to part 2 of a 3-part interview series where I sat down with Daniel, aka Forge of Artakha, one of the most prominent Bionicle MOCists on Instagram, and talked to him about his different kinds of MOCs, his journey of building with LEGO, and what it means to be a Bionicle builder in today's day and age. In part 1, we sat down with Daniel and interviewed him about his own personal journey with LEGO, and got a really quick overview of some of the MOCs he had brought to share with all of us. But now for part 2, it's time to delve deep into the builds themselves. We will be taking a look at each one of the builds, kind of treating them like mini Bionicle Fanon reviews, and I'll be sharing my thoughts, asking him questions about the build experience, and really just having a fun time talking about some custom LEGO Bionicle models. And so if that's your kind of thing, I hope you stick around to find out. Let's now waste no more time and introduce Daniel, aka Forge of Artakha. Alright, so we are back with Daniel, aka Forge of Artakha. Now, of course, we did a full-on interview style with our creator spotlight in the first part of this video series. Check that out in the link in the description below if you want to see that video. But today we're going to be going in-depth into all of the MOCs that you have brought for us to look at, and there is such a crazy variety here. Now, if you can just give us a very brief reintroduction of yourself, what you do, where to find you on socials, then we'll jump right into the very mini Fanon reviews.
Sure, thanks for having me, Chris.
Of course.
So my name is Daniel. You guys might know me better as Forge of Artakha. The last couple of years, my little kind of hobby has been to kind of breathe new life into the old story of Bionicle. I'm either continuing where I left off or kind of reimagining a lot of those classic stories from a new perspective. So all these MOCs, with the exception of very few, maybe one or two, are actually canon characters from the story, just my own interpretation of what they might look like in my head versus from the actual canisters or sets from LEGO. And Chris has been very kind to invite me to show you all some more in-depth. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you so much for being here and bringing all these MOCs. I am not a big MOCist myself, so I'm always continuously blown away by seeing images of MOCs online and whatnot. And it's something completely different to actually have so many different ones to see here in person and to show in greater detail to all of you. So for this video, we will be focusing only on some of the models that you actually have already published, some of the finalized models. There are a few work in progress MOCs here, so stay tuned for a third video to take a look at those, plus a few surprises near the end of that, so that will be a quite exciting third part to this series. But as of right now, let's just jump right into things. I think the first one we're taking a look at is the Shadowed one. Alright, so here we have the Shadowed one. This is obviously the leader of the Dark Hunters. That is a complete reimagining of the original 2005 combo model, while still, as Daniel mentioned, retaining the original structure for the torso, which is super, super cool. So, I'm not going to treat this as a normal fan review because we have so much stuff to get through. We'll be going through things super briefly, but I just kind of wanted to give a quick look at exactly how this poses, thank you, how this all works together, and how we can actually play around and articulate this model. So, as you can see here, we have the massive head, which obviously is taking a lot of design similarities from the original thing, which I think is really cool. The head is actually probably the closest thing to the original model that has not changed, but obviously everything else is very, very different. The arms are a lot more armored up here, and you can see he has multiple joints on those arms. I love the way the hands are done because you actually have the thumbs here on either end, which you can move around, but also the movable hand here on the ball joint. Now, what is really cool about this is that obviously the legs are just a lot more solid than the original model. You can see that they are very, very bulky legs, which makes sense for a character like this. And of course, they do have the friction piston articulation there, which is really good. This is not going to be toppling over anytime soon with that amount of friction on the knees there.
He is a little top heavy in the sense that maybe it's less top heavy in that he has very smooth feet. Like there's just not a lot of grip on the feet. So while he can support his own weight, he's just prone to like sliding around. So the tail is very helpful, as you can see, of kind of getting him to stay put. And the staff definitely helps as well. And I couldn't think of a clever way of incorporating the Rotuka spinners into the story, so I've since replaced it with a mysterious crystal.
fair enough. I think the crystal is a lot cooler in my opinion anyways, so that worked out. And I love the usage of the CCBS pieces where you can see they actually make up the armor plating on the tail there, because that feels very much like a natural organic part of him versus something that's kind of just been added on by random pieces. But this really does feel like a tail that has been added on, so super cool to see that. And of course, I love the back construction here. You can really see the armor plating on the back with some tubes going onto the top. This just feels a lot more sturdy and stable than the original model, which we can probably bring over to do some comparisons right now. Actually, I'll get him on this side so you can bring over the original copy of the model here. So you can see there's a lot of similarities where the head is super similar, just an extra, or maybe I'm just missing that piece there. I don't remember if it had the second one. And as you said, the torso is pretty much the same construction, although the original model is just a lot gappier. There's just less pieces being used in it. Personally, I always kind of preferred the Centrak combiner model, or the Voporak one. The Voporak,
Voporak is my favorite combiner.
A lot more than the shadowed one. If it were up to me, I would have switched their looks or something like that. Yeah, but
that would have made a lot of sense.
Yeah, but it's still super cool to see how there's some design inspiration that just translates. Like you've got the silver Borak eyes on the sides, the legs here, which obviously are translated here. Of course, the Visorak legs are very spiky, so you've got some spikes going up there, and I love that parts usage of the Hordika Wanua heads there as the thighs. Those just really do add some bulk to the shadowed one here. One other thing that I think is pretty cool is that, especially as you kind of move these around to the back, it is very clear that the torso construction is just the same. You've got double sockets on the back here, just like there's two sockets here, and then you've got the same way the head attaches. So this is just so cool to see, but of course just so much more armored up by Technic panels and stuff that's filling it in. And then we actually have some Knights Kingdom armor pieces that cover up the Rakshi heads there, so that obviously adds a lot more detailing to the model. And yeah, I guess if you want to talk a little bit more about the inspirations for building this and how he stacks up to the original, that would be fantastic.
Sure. So a big part of my kind of design philosophy is just improving on what LEGO has already created. Like, they already created a very interesting character, and like the concept behind the Shadow one is very interesting. The color scheme is interesting. It almost has both a reptilian kind of vibe, like almost like a T-Rex kind of king vibe, and also like an Anubis vibe, like an Egyptian Pharaoh vibe. So I was really trying to capture kind of both of those things. Wanted him to be very imposing, like he could go toe to toe with the Makuta since they are rivals in the story. So I felt like this was a really great launching point. So I really started with the actual set. I built the set, and then from there fleshed it out piece by piece, starting with the torso, moving on to the arms. The legs are probably the most custom and definitely the trickiest. The head is my favorite part of the original, so I left that pretty much intact. And then I just have this really fond memory of like reading in the story, I think in the novels, the scene of him like shooting with his staff Zocton and turning him into a strange monstrosity. So I really wanted to make his staff very unique and mysterious, and it not be clear like what exactly happened in that scene. Was it intentional? Was there some interesting property of that crystal? So I purposely left that as kind of an interesting little anomaly as part of the design.
Well, thank you for sharing the inspiration behind this model. We have so many more to go, so we may as well just move to the next one, but this was easily one of the ones I was most anticipating actually being able to play around with and have in my hands, especially after seeing photos. Just such a cool reimagining of a very classic Bionicle character that, as you said, is criminally underused. With that, let's move on to the next build. Next up, we have a reimagining of Bionicle Generation 2's Tahu. As you mentioned, this was kind of one that was inspired by bits and pieces from the art book itself, but obviously you've taken it in its own direction as well. I think a good way to start off here is if you're able to share some inspiration and also tell us where you got that amazing Vahi as well. That'd be super cool.
Sure. So Tahu is one of my favorite characters. I think Kopaka probably is the coolest, but maybe Tahu is my favorite for the nostalgia. So
coolest.
This was, yes, of course. And I really wanted to kind of marry the really interesting additions to the G2 kind of designs and kind of make it more reminiscent of the original kind of very naturalistic elemental aspect of the original 2001 sets, and really make the most of the new CCPS kind of plates. I'm personally a big fan of the CCBS editions, and I think they marry really well with the Technic ones. So this is kind of my personal This is my personal interpretation of what G2 Tahu could have been if it had been kind of a marriage of both new pieces and kind of old concepts.
That is a really great way of putting it, and I believe you said for the mask, that was one of the ones from Shapeways, it seems, right?
Yes, I'm a big fan of Shapeways. It's consistently good quality, and that particular model of the Vahi is by Cyberhand on Shapeways, so that is a mask that you can purchase, and it fits really well and really snugly onto both the hand, as you can see, and onto the face as well.
Well, thank you for sharing that inspiration. I think one of my favorite things about this model in particular is just how natural it looks in terms of the armor plating, and that is one of the best things I think about CCBS is that you can get characters that feel very smooth in their armor. Of course, you have the Praetorian Guard armor plates, which I think were definitely super underutilized. Would have loved to see that actually in Bionicle itself, because that is a very, very cool armor piece to get here. But as you can see, he is just using a lot of the standard Tahu pieces from the G2 sets, like you've got the same blades and everything, and of course, this is just going for a much more elemental vibe to it, so the transparent orange mask, which was a great addition in one of the special free packs back when G2 was first coming out as a GWP, and even the Chima wings. These are from the Legends of Chima buildable figures, which unfortunately never released in America. You would have had to go to Asia or Europe to get them, but these really great fire wings on the back, and I think one of the coolest things is taking this model and comparing it next to the original set for G2 Tahu, because you can see a lot of the inspiration here is very similar. Oh, there goes his mask there, but there's also a lot of things that are different about this model in particular, especially in the way of the presentation and the very elemental vibe, where there's only a few transparent pieces on the main G2 Tahu, and it's mostly red and feels very mechanical and armored up, especially with the pistons. This feels like, I guess, a spirit of fire, as they would call him in some of the original Bionicle movies, or something truly elemental, which is very, very cool. And of course, one thing I have to do is take that Shapeways mask and see what it looks like on him, because this is a very, very cool piece. Let's take a closer look at that Mask of Time here. This is obviously the G2 version of the Vahi, which we saw in a couple of comics. Again, Shapeways is a really good way to get a lot of these fantastic mask prints in really high quality. I mean, this is just really, really cool. And we can take a look. Look at that. That fits on quite well onto Tahu there, and that just gives it a whole different vibe. But I really like how the spikes of the Vahi, whether intentional or not, really do kind of feel like flames, or almost feels like they're part of this elemental look, and that completely changes the vibe of this character. So overall, super, super cool stuff. Next up, we have this mechanized version of a Rakshi, and the thing that immediately stands out to me is just how silver this is. This is almost monochromatic in its look and feel, and it feels very mechanical and skeletal, right down to the G2 bone pieces being used on the lower legs there. And of course, as you move it around, just look at the amount of mechanical contraptions on the back here. You've got like a propellers, like a jet engine, flames shooting off of its feet. You've got the rib cages from Fantoka on the back here, and this is easily one of the most interesting builds to me, because especially it doesn't really translate to any original Bionicle character other than just the Rakshi being the main template here, and it really just does its own thing and does feel like it could have been part of the Bionicle universe, almost reminiscent to, say, the Kratakal from the Dark Hunters or something like that. That's a modified version of a Rakshi, but of course taking it to just another level. Maybe if you can share a little bit about your design and inspiration and influences here, and kind of how this came together, that would be really cool.
Sure. The Rakshi were, I think, kind of one of the best villains of the entire series. I think they ended up being kind of underutilized towards the end, because they're actually quite powerful in the fact that they can create these and create entire armies of them. Really makes them quite scary. So I thought it'd be cool if either the Order or maybe the Vortex on Zia tried to manufacture their own version of the Rakshi. So this is kind of my attempt of what kind of other forces in the world might try to create to combat the Rakshi. Since the Rakshi is so formidable, why not actually use that to their advantage and create their own version of Rakshi? So the idea was that this would maybe be created to fight off invading forces of the Brotherhood towards the end of the Brotherhood War.
Well, thank you for sharing that. This is such a cool concept, and I definitely agree with you that the Rakshi were certainly quite underutilized, especially as Bionicle went on. Nice that we got one for Stars, though, for the Heat Vision version, but overall, just very, very cool concepts for creatures to have. Just such an amount of detail here is so cool, and as we do the turnaround here, you can really just see this is surprisingly really, really stable despite having a very unorthodox torso and a very large back piece of it, but I guess that makes sense because a lot of these pieces, like the rib cages, are quite light, so it really does support its own weight, which is super cool. And you absolutely have so many different mechanical aspects here, from like one side having the tube there, which is really cool. Feels like this has been cobbled together like some sort of an experiment, or like a mechanical, like a robotic version of a Rakshi, so this is just a very interesting model to see. And again, as you can see here, it's completely silver, which just absolutely adds to the aesthetic and look and feel, because none of the original Rakshi we got were actually silver. This is just from the Rudaka set there, so great to see this in action. With that, let's now move on to the next build. Next up here, we have the mock that you said was kind of the inspiration for starting your very famous Instagram account now. This is Artaka himself. Let's hear from Forge of Artakha as to how this came together and the inspiration behind him.
Sure, I got very lucky with that handle.
Yes.
So what really got me back into building was the start of the TTV Canon contest, and the first of those was Artaka. Regardless of even having any hopes of winning it, that just excited me very much to get back into building and got me thinking about the story and how he was such a fascinating character. He kind of reminds me of Gandalf in a lot of ways, as this almost kind of omniscient character that has a lot of power but purposely does not use it because he wants to try helping others kind of solve their own problems without having to resort to overwhelming force. So he's a very special character to me. So this is my own personal interpretation of the character. The giant warhammer can be shortened to be just kind of a hammer he uses for his smithing, and he is purposely designed after the Umbra set because he and Umbra are creations of the Great Beings. I consider that they were both created around the same time by the same figures, and they probably are about similar power levels. So I kind of think of Umbra as almost like the third long-lost brother of Curzani and Artaka that the family doesn't talk about as much, but he is there, so the design is very intentionally based off of Umbra.
It's the one brother that got really into roller skating.
Yes. Zoomed off into the sunset.
Yes. Well, let's take a closer look at the Artaka model itself here. I think the coolest thing about this is, you were telling me a little bit about this off camera, but maybe we can share it a little bit more for the viewers, and that is the mask. So this mask is not plastic. This has a lot of weight to it, and this is metal. So what exactly, where did this come from, and how'd you get this?
So this is actually a print from Shapeways. This is from Iron Foam Armory on Shapeways. The actual design itself is by Perpetual. And this is a custom created Mask of Creation design, and it's very much inspired by the Temple of Kininui. So these spires are very much meant to kind of resemble the spires of the original Kininui shrine from 2001. The mask itself is meant to be kind of an amalgamation of all the original 2001 masks, so I thought it was a very special mask. I thought it perfectly recreated the spirit of 2001. So I was willing to kind of shell out some extra money to really get a permanent version of this. So I found on Shapeways that you could actually order the masks in metal. It didn't have to be in plastic, and it wasn't really that much more expensive. So I kind of took a gamble. I wasn't really sure what the quality would be like, and honestly, it's been a joy to have in my collection. It's kind of like my favorite thing in my collection now is this particular custom mask, because it feels like a combination of both the original 2001 and what the community has done with the series since its cancellation. It's a really cool kind of example of what the community can do with a series that is no longer alive in the sense that LEGO is making more of it, but it is very much alive in the community itself.
If you don't mind me asking, about how much did you pay for this? Because this is such good quality, and it's really heavy as well. This is just so impressive.
I could be mistaken, but if I remember correctly, because I bought it about 2 years ago, I would say it was about $50, not counting shipping.
Dang. Wow. Well, now after this video, I need to go to Shapeways myself and pick up some metal masks, because this is just such good quality to see here. And putting it back on Artaka here, that just looks really impressive to me as a character. Now, briefly going through the articulation and posing of this, let's take a look. You can really see how the legs can be fully bent up at the knee there, which is really awesome to see. Almost, as you said, it's kind of reminds me of the Umbra construction, because it is obviously based off of that, from the way that the legs are set up to even some of the feet construction, if I recall correctly, based on how that's built. And I also love how you managed to integrate some Zammer spheres into there. So you've got the gold Zammer sphere is kind of his chest in the center there, and then of course the hammer itself has these Zammer spheres held on. That is a really unique way of attaching them, because obviously they don't actually have any connection points. So
no, but they fit really snugly.
That is right. Yeah, this is really snug. Yeah, wow, that is a great building technique. I really like that. And of course, moving on the back, you have a bunch of different tubes, which seems to be kind of a design hallmark of stuff that you make. A lot of them do have these mechanical tubes in them to really kind of signify that mechanical aspect and being wired together, which is great. And I love the usage of the Vaki heads here too. That kind of feels like almost, I don't know, energy projections or energy armor, with adding to the color scheme of the translucent on green. Oh, whoops, knocked him over there. But overall, what a cool build, and I, again, love the Umbra inspiration. I also am just now realizing that these pieces around the chest are the eye stalks.
Yes, they are.
Whoa, okay.
They work very well as crystals also.
That is so cool. I didn't even notice that myself, but yeah, if you zoom in here, look at this. There's a ton of different eye stalks being used to kind of, as you said, like, it feels like crystals growing out of his armor, which is so cool. And he even has one on the end of his hammer here as well. So what a cool build. This is, again, one of my favorites, and definitely a worthy Artaka that really does, I feel, embody the essence of the character.
Thank you.
With that, let's move on to the next one. Alright, well, I think it is a great time now to talk about Larisca, who we just had our Fanon contest for, and this was one of my personal favorite interpretations going into the contest, just seeing the amount of detail and very unique aesthetic that this has. From the digitigrade legs here that are a little bit more animalistic and bestial, to something that feels a little bit more mechanical on the top here, with the teal armor plating and of course the epic dreadlocks and the hair going along the side of the head there. This is just such a unique take on Larisca, and I would love to hear a lot more about your inspiration in terms of putting this together. How many knives are on there? Because I'm counting quite a lot just strapped onto the character here, and just talk us through a little bit about the design process for this character.
I think there might be somewhere close to anywhere between 16 and 20 knives.
Oh my goodness.
She's definitely packing. I picture that scene with either Legolas or I think it was Killy from The Hobbit, where he's just constantly taking out knives. I kind of wanted that kind of energy for Larisca. So Larisca was one of my favorite characters in the original story, and it was always kind of a shock that we never really got a canon version of her, even in any of the illustrated versions, because quite a few characters got illustrated kind of variations. So I was very excited at the opportunity to kind of build my take on her for the original TTV contest. So the initial version was built for that. The only thing I really changed for your contest is I added some more padding to the back, and I gave her a little bit more solid articulation on the knees to give her kind of a more of a bestial, almost like gymnastics kind of leg with the double joints. I'm very happy with this. I'm especially happy with kind of how the hair turned out. I was kind of going for almost like dreads, and I feel like that turned out almost too well, to the point where I don't think I could replicate that design if I tried. And I'm just really happy with that she's very Technic from the waist up, and she's very CCBS from the waist down. So the idea was that she almost doesn't quite fit in the world. She's almost like an anomaly in the world, and I wanted to very much make her an inspiration of the Throwbots, the series that came before Bionicle. So she's almost like kind of a combination of all these different themes, combining all these different ideas from across the Bionicle timeline.
Well, this is some really cool stuff here, and I immediately noticed that there was kind of a divide between Technic stuff and then a lot of mechanical stuff on the top, and then of course you have very smooth and organic like legs at the bottom there, which is probably one of my favorite things about this design. Now, there's so much to talk about here. There's almost too much that I can take a look at, but one of my favorite things here is the way you did the mechanical arm. Actually, you actually have the extender piece for the friction joints, so that really does feel like something fully robotic, and then of course the head itself can be just really moved around here. It is just kind of a slicer-like head, but this does have the full articulation, and I believe it does technically fit a Kanohi. It doesn't attach on, but you you can put that on if you want to. That's a unique look. I mean, that definitely does feel like it fits in with the character, so can technically wear the Kanohi there, which makes sense. Now, what's really cool, I love the way that this arm is done, because you have like almost like a, what would you describe this yellow bits as?
I don't quite know what I would call it. I think the design inspiration was Samus's pauldron armor from Metroid.
Yes.
And I kind of liked the idea that she kind of had asymmetrical armor, that she kind of was creating her armor as she kind of went through her life. Maybe there's like an augmentation there, that maybe there's like power cells so that she can throw things either harder or faster, but it very intentionally is an asymmetrical design from shoulder to shoulder. And I also really thought that teal and yellow would be a cool color combo. So I had a lot of those little kind of yellow pieces from G2, and I wanted to find kind of a cool use for those, so I felt like they fit really naturally with this color scheme.
The yellow is a really cool highlight color here, and again, I do really appreciate just the amount of mechanical detail on the back. I think my favorite part of this is actually the brick separator. This is literally just a brick separator, I guess is the tail. That is a perfect piece usage of that, and I did not even see that on the original submission until actually having this in my hands with the brick separator on the back there is really funny. And I also love how all these knives, like you can actually take them out. Like you can remove these and use them as throwing daggers for Larisca. So that is super cool. And there is one other feature that you have here, which is I noticed you brought an extra arm here.
Yes. So here we have Larisca with her arm still attached. So this would be pre-mutiny. I don't know if she would ever get her actual arm back. I kind of imagine it is in a drawer tucked away in the Shadow One's office around his other trophies.
This is the original mechanical arm here, I guess the new mechanical arm that she would later on get, which is very cool. But it is funny how you actually did come up with the other arm for the other side, and that definitely does feel like it just absolutely fits the color scheme here. You can really easily see that getting lobbed off by the Shadowed One. So very cool how you did actually include the extra arm here, and I like how this does mirror the mechanical one, where you do have kind of this Technic ball, kind of piston piece out here, or something sticking out that's kind of a mechanical detail that does actually feel reminiscent of this new mechanical arm. And of course the handpiece is very similar, just in a silver color rather than the teal, so this all works really well, and it's just so cool to see a different version of the character in a different time period. Let's now move on though to the next build. Next up, we have a duo of two different Maturin. Now, as you mentioned, these are actually reminiscent or inspired by builds from around the community, where the point of these was to show that you could build existing characters in the styles of other MOCists. So if you can share a little bit about these two Maturin and the designers that, I guess, behind the original constructions, that would be fantastic.
Sure. So I am constantly amazed at the talent that is in the community, and I wanted to really pay an homage to that in my last series. So the Mazika here is inspired by the frames of Trick Mox, one of my favorite MOCists, and Voltraz here is inspired by the builds of Brandon builds, both of which can be found on Instagram. Both are super talented builders, and I really wanted to showcase that you can really elevate a character by giving it a very kind of unique, robust build. So these are characters that I felt like conceptually in the story were really interesting and looked like they were going to start some really unique stories going forward, but the sets themselves felt very much like afterthoughts, and very much felt like Lego was kind of digging parts out of the bottom of the bin. So I really wanted to show that you could create some really interesting designs out of these characters.
I think these two characters obviously go very well together, the two brothers in arms, so to speak, from that story serial, and I'm kind of curious, what was the idea behind the inspiration of kind of adding the transparent neon green to Mazika here? Because obviously Voltraz is definitely very close in his color scheme and character, I think, to the original one, but this is absolutely a very unique and fresh take that truly kind of feels like he is set apart. I'm curious kind of where the inspiration came for that.
Sure. So the initial idea behind Mazika was actually that I don't have either of these sets, actually, so I had to build both of these characters from scratch. So that alone gave me some freedom, and then beyond that, I really wanted to make Mazika stand out as kind of a more special Maturin. I wanted to give him almost like a cybernetic vibe, that he was given kind of very rare, very mysterious technological powers from the Order, since he is kind of the newest recruit of the Order of Matanui. So this was kind of my idea of giving him almost like arm shields from the Order. So those would be things that are kind of upgrades he is given, whereas Voltraz is kind of this renegade kind of murderous Maturin, which is rare for the Maturin. So I let him kind of be almost like a very hunched over, almost like animalistic interpretation of a Maturin, kind of like a criminal on the loose, whereas MOCist is meant to be much more upright, to kind of reflect his kind of more heroic nature. And the color scheme was really just a product of tinkering around and finding that we didn't really see any other sets that had that particular color scheme. And I also mirrored the pink eye stalk with a little pink heart light, which we haven't seen in any of the sets. So if you look underneath, there's actually a little pink heart light to go with his eye stalk.
There you go. That is a really nice touch here. Really does make the character feel unique. And as you said, I mean, these are basically just Matoran builds, which are some of the, in my opinion, probably the least interesting Matoran builds that we ever got from Bionicle, despite introducing a lot of pieces. Very simplified stuff. So it's so cool to see complete reimaginings of these characters that I remember when I was a kid, this was around the era that I was getting into Bionicle. And these two characters really interested me because they were something very different, as you said, two Matoran warriors, which you don't really see for the story. Usually they're the ones needing to be saved, so super cool to see actually two competent heroes on, I guess, hero and villain on the Matoran side. And it's very, very interesting to see just a very different direction for these. And as you said, very talented build frames for the MOCist who came up with these frames, because they're just so interesting. And I love the way that the Voltraz one looks, because you've got the very, as you said, hunched over back here. This feels like a very custom and unique design. So super cool to see these two characters being reimagined. And with that, we can probably move on to the next stuff. The people of this world are builders, but in their hearts is the power to destroy. That was the quote from the Makuta in the Matanui online game, who appeared in this shadowy, monstrous form. Now, can you tell us a little bit about the design inspirations, aesthetics? I mean, we obviously know what this is inspired from, but how did you even come up with a model like this and putting it together?
I literally put together all of my spare early 2001 to 2003 black parts into a Ziploc bag, and just kind of had it sitting in a corner for a long time as a project to work on a rainy day. And finally I had the time to just dump them out, and I literally just stitched together whatever pieces my hand touched first. So the goal behind this was to build something chaotic, to recreate kind of the chaos embodiment of Makuta from the original depiction, which is my personal favorite. Just like kind of my first introduction to General Grievous in Star Wars was the animated version.
Yep.
I think that's the most imposing. I also think the very first introduction to Makuta in his animated form was also the most imposing. So this is my ode to that version of Makuta.
I 100% agree with you. While I do appreciate the kind of turn that Pterodax took later on as kind of the mastermind villain, this was certainly a very unique take that felt very primordial and super unique to the Matanui online game's vibe and atmosphere of having him be just this entity of darkness that exists as the void, or as nothing, as he said, telling them that they would go back into the sea from where they came. Just super, super cool to see that. And of course, you can't really even spot him here, but this is the Tohunga version of Makuta. So let's get the shadowy monstrosity off here for a second, and then we can just focus in on just the Tohunga version, which is very cool because this is a build that actually does mimic your version of Takua, which is also really interesting to see the way that you've taken the standard Mechanized frame, or the Tohunga frame as you've said, and just reimagined it, where you can see Takua on one side, which is using a very similar frame, or I guess some sorts of similar design aesthetics, but then the Makuta Matoran build here just has a different posture. He's kind of more hunched over, and I just really like this, seeing the dichotomy between the two. And maybe if you could talk us through a little bit about how you came up with these smaller Tohunga type designs, that would be super cool to hear.
Sure. So again, I was really introduced to Bionicle in 2001 when it first came out. So like one of my first memories is seeing the Matoran versions of the Maturin, and seeing the Tohunga versions in the Matanui online game. And like that to me is like, when I think about Bionicle, that's what I think of as those classic characters. So a lot of love went into these, and I will probably always keep these guys assembled as like little figures on my desk. Have a lot of emotional connection to these little guys. And as far as like the design inspiration, I actually have to give credit to the person who I bought the original Matoran from on eBay, because that person, I don't have their name memorized, but that person who sold me the Matoran actually did his own revamped version of all of them and sold me his revamped version of them.
Okay.
And I was so impressed with his design and the fact that he just sold his like mocks of the Matoran. that I kind of did a riff off of his. So I can't take full credit. I've also seen similar variations of this online from years ago, so I imagine he also was inspired by other people. So I can't quite say where the original design came from, but I love that this is an evolution of both the original idea and the community's kind of building upon those ideas over the years.
Absolutely. I definitely have a lot of great memories from playing the Motunui online game. I mean, me personally, I didn't really get into Bionicle until it was almost too late because I was first and foremost a Lego fan. I didn't even have or get any Bionicles. I had Maturin lying around my house for some reason, maybe from McDonald's Happy Meal toys that we just didn't throw out, but I never really knew what they were until somebody told me to play the Motunui online game in 2009. So I got into it around the Glatorian era, actually, but this is what I really also feel. When I think of Bionicle, I think of this style of build and this style of character because playing the Motunui online game is what got me into Bionicle. It's what got me even deeper into Lego, because back then, I mean, this was before Ninjago, I didn't even know that Lego were doing their own original storylines and doing something as deep and robust as the Bionicle story. So coming into it in 2009 when the entire story was laid out and just experiencing it, I read all the books in order and all the comics and played the games in order. That was a really cool experience because I was like, wow, there is so much lore behind this and so much uniqueness to this world, and that's what really I feel kept me into buying Lego and kept me as a Lego fan. And I have Bionicle to thank and the Motunui online game. So very, very cool to see the Mectorin version of Pterodax. I've got the classic style of Mectorin at home myself, which is just the standard build with the infected mask, because that's just such a cool build. But then, of course, you have the entire Shadow Amalgamation version of him as well, which you can also, of course, take off the head of the Tohunga version if you want to do the honors there. I'll stop spinning this one here and just let us take a look at this guy here. But then, of course, you get that classic look and feel for that, where placing the mask on.
So this is how he would have looked in the game. And if you are a viewer who you're curious about Bionicle, maybe you're bi-curious, and you don't quite understand, like, man, like, I get that they're cool toys, but I don't quite get, like, why are so many people hyped about the story? Start with the Motunui online game, and 30 seconds into that, you will understand why there is such a special element to the story. There is something very unique about the combination of the machine-like characters in a very naturalistic setting with really atmospheric, beautiful music and sound effects. It's a very atmospheric, relaxing game. It's a puzzle exploration game, and this is kind of the end point of that story, is seeing this character revealed after a lot of mystery. So I highly recommend checking that game out online.
100%. You can play it on biomediaproject.com, which is a website that actually houses and archives pretty much every form of Bionicle media that exists. They retain the games in playable states and actually have ported them into playable versions even after Flash went away. So really great that this is still being preserved for new fans to play it. I mean, I would never have gotten into Bionicle or Lego if the game wasn't still playable in 2009, and it's still playable today in 2022. So absolutely made an impact, it sounds, on both of our childhoods, and this is kind of the culmination of that. But with that, I think it's time we move on to the next build. Alright, so here is one of the only unique characters. As you mentioned, this was actually a mock that you built years ago. Now, this is really impressive to me because obviously it is using a lot of the older pieces, and you haven't really touched this, is that correct, since then, or maybe made some minor changes, but a lot of this seems like it was just one of your early mocks. If you can talk us through the design process of this and what this is all about.
Sure, so this is the only original character that I've brought here. This is kind of like my time capsule of me as a MOCist back way back in like 2004 and 5 when I was on BC Power. I was really big into the RPG scene on that website. And I probably have touched it up a little bit since then because you can see some 2007 pieces tucked away here and there. But I do remember very vividly that the original design was from 2004, 2005, using a lot of Metro pieces, a lot of 2006 pieces. So I think kind of that era of 2004 through 2007 is really where this mock comes from. It's a Toa Vice with a kind of more cybernetic kind of leaning, so that's okay. He can put it right back on. So he has a mechanical arm and mechanical legs, and the idea is that this is kind of what can happen to Toa after a lot of action in the field. So the idea is that the Toa are not invincible and that they can get broken down just as much as any of the Dark Hunters or any of the other characters.
I really like that concept for a character, and man, this is a lot more impressive than anything I was building in middle school, and probably still building today. So, very, very cool how this is kind of the mock that started it all, if you could call it that. That really sets you on this journey of creating custom stuff, and this is just so cool to see what some of your early kind of building styles were, and how this sort of translates into the stuff you make today. So, thank you for sharing this. That's really awesome. So with that, we have summed up our in-depth looks at just some of the many crazy, insane builds that Forge of Artakha has created to represent all of these different canon characters. So cool to especially compare some of them alongside the actual original models and just see completely different reinterpretations of classic characters like Larisca here and of course Artaka and whatnot in completely different styles. So if we can do a bit of a recap on all the models we saw today, I think that's a great way to end out this video.
Thanks, Chris. So we looked at the Shadow one. This is my own variation of kind of the classic set building off of that frame. We have my version of what G2 Tahu might have looked like if he had been more kind of inspired as like a Spirit of Fire versus a more mechanical kind of representation. We have my own version of Artaka. This is kind of how I picture the character and kind of the character that I'm writing the perspective from in my Forge of Artakha account. This is kind of my spin on the Rakshi. This is a fully mechanized version of the Rakshi, as if kind of the opponents of the Brotherhood were creating their own version to fight against them. This is an original character that is from my middle school years, a very long time ago. And then I think a couple of these ones are some new pieces that we'll be looking at in a future video. And then my entry for the Larisca contest is also over here next to my rendition of the classic 2001 Makuta. Thank you for inviting me, Chris. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for being here. Definitely go check out Forge of Artakha and Travels of Takua, both of the accounts that you maintain on Instagram, linked in the description below. This has been such a fun time actually getting a chance to interact with your mocks, and I have been following you for a long time. Even before we met and everything, I was following your account and reading through all the captions, which really did feel like something completely unique to me, because a lot of times you see a lot of great mocks out there, but you really have great mocks with a story presentation to them. And having them be written as in-universe, like a journal of Artaka or some of the reports of the Order of Matanui, have just been so cool to read up on the lore of what all these characters are about. And again, do check that out. Thank you all so much for tuning into Duck Breaks, and let me know what you think of these builds in the comments below. Alright, and with that, we have summed up part 2 of this 3-part interview series with some of my favorite Bionicle builders, starting off with Daniel, aka Forge of Artakha. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and do let me know down in the comments below which of the models you saw today was your favorite. Are you maybe going to plan on building or recreating some of these yourselves? And how do you think they stack up against some of the official LEGO Bionicle sets? With that, we have summed up this look at some of Forge of Artakha's fantastic mocks. Thank you all so much for tuning into Duck Breaks. Be sure to like and subscribe for even more LEGO news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon. And bye for now.